morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the call today. We are glad to have you with us on yet another series of webinars. Uh, Many of you who have joined us earlier will know that this is one in a long series of seminars dealing with different issues around advocacy. This is part of the Skills Initiative to ensure that we deepen advocacy work in Nigeria and ensure that the many organizations who work around advocacy become more capable to carry out their work on advocacy. On behalf of the managing partner and all of us at ACIOE, I would like to say welcome to all of you, and in a special way to welcome Mr. Edwin Ikworia, who will be our anchor today to take us through the topic ethical considerations in policy advocacy. I'm glad to welcome Mr. Edwin, such a mouthful of achievements and such wonderful book. Your profile in itself heightens our expectations of what should come out of this. You're welcome, Edwin, and over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Harry, and thank you, everybody. I'm glad you could join us today. It's really quite I mean, it didn't look like it was me you were talking about. You were reading there. I've not heard my CV read out like that to me before. So it was a bit, yeah. Thank you all. And yeah, indeed, I'm glad to be here today. I'm glad to talk about ethical policy advocacy, and especially given the context within which we work. We work on the African continent, and so with the governance space, with I think Mr. Ilya said it before, with the shrinking civic space, it only means that there's a lot of scrutiny that is, placed on advocates. When you come out in the name of any group and say you're speaking or advocating for a specific issue, especially when it goes against the status quo or when it goes against the political trend, then you're definitely looking for trouble. And so for you to be able to stand above board, especially when you are, stirring the hornet's nest in that sense, you're likely going to be placed under a microscope. And as such, if you're not grounded, if your ethical policy, if your ethics is not strong, they can find a reason not to do what you're asking for, in fact, to discredit you. And in that case, it becomes a real difficult balance to make. So that's the context within which I'm going to be talking to us today. And thank you for having me. If you share the slides now, I would like to start going through them. Okay, while we are waiting for the slides to come through, I just wanted us to start, first of all, about how do we define policy advocacy or ethical policy advocacy? How do we define that? And I think it is important for us to get that it is not everything that is advocacy. So there's a lot of misconception about what is advocacy. Next slide, please. And when you consider the idea of advocacy, you're basically thinking about, what is the idea you are bringing that is something that is not right. There are all kinds of things going on, but when you think about something that is less than desired, something that is not up to par with what your expectations are. What do I mean by that? Say you live in a community and for no reason or for some reason, kids are getting diseases, right? Or kids are dying prematurely under 5. Before they're 5 years old, you're losing many children. Or women go to hospitals and they don't give birth. I mean, they give birth in hospitals or wherever they give birth. Because of pregnancy complications, they die, right? And you're getting a lot of this happening. So you're dissatisfied with the status quo. And so you want that to change. It is only when you are taking a specific issue because you don't like the status quo, and then you take it on, you represent those issues because you want it to change. There are many examples of that. That is what is called advocacy. That is advocacy. Then policy advocacy itself is a matter of knowing that this situation is so bad, but it's in the hands of some policymakers that if they take a different decision or if they allocate resources in a particular direction, or if they include that issue in their deliberations, things can change. That is when you take advocacy from just the issues into a policy level. And that is the point at which when you begin to engage policymakers, you begin to engage government stakeholders, the guys who have the power to make decisions about that situation that is very bad. That is policy advocacy, and it's a very powerful tool. It's a very powerful tool in the sense that a lot of people can come, and again, in African context where the resources are so small, they're so few, so you see a lot of people competing, right, for the very scarce resources that exist to solve the problems that they want to solve. And these are the kinds of things that makes policy advocacy, you know, such a call it it's a ground where a lot of people play in. So because a lot of people play in that space, and people begin to people begin to you know, demand or advocate for the scarce resources, then the eyes and the ears of the policymakers or the targets of your policy advocacy begin to really widen. They want to check, who is this person that is talking to me about this? Where is it coming from? Who is funding them, right? How are they, what is giving them what is the lever they are using to make this an issue? Then they want to send scrutiny becomes the order of the day. In fact, in some places, the noise we make as advocates is so much that they've even created legislations, created some laws that just opens up the space in a way that if you have anything that is hidden, that is not if you have any situation that is less than optimal, you could be in trouble. I mean, very serious trouble. You could be seen as an agent of foreign intervention, for instance. And so these are reasons why ethical policy advocacy is such a critical part. Next slide, please. So when we've talked about this already, but I want to talk about, we've talked about policy advocacy. I want to talk about ethical policy advocacy. In this case, is that it is not everything you advocate for. And I said that on my LinkedIn post, I was asking some questions, opposers, basically getting to just to spark some conversations. That is it everything you advocate for, right? Not just in terms of the issue themselves. Is it everybody you advocate for? Is it, are all constituents? I mean, is everything, are you supposed to bring everything up, you know? But the question is that you need to you need to discuss advocacy within the laws and boundaries and regulations of a particular context. So in Nigeria, for instance, because I'm using Nigeria as an example, because this is the seat of where we're talking, right? There are some things you cannot advocate for if they go against the law, right? Because if you do that, except of course you advocate for a change of that law in itself first. But if you're advocating and you go beyond the law, I've seen some very radical advocates who have gone out to actually commit crimes in the name of advocacy, right? Basically, what we call social miscreants. That's what policymakers call them, to say because they want to get attention, then they undertake certain steps that also brings them into you know, they begin to face the law because the steps they have taken is against the law. That is one. So you need to also understand that ethical advocacy is not just about the integrity of the issues you're dealing with or the integrity of the organization that you're dealing with. It's also about, you know, how do you work within the boundaries of existing frameworks? So I've seen some people who have taken, in the name of advocacy, they bribe officials. I've seen that happen. And because they are funded by specific other external groups who will say, you know, we want this to change. And for that reason, they begin to lure policymakers into certain commitments, you know, by offering them what you call inducements. Those are not ethical policy advocacy. And that's one of the kind of things you want to check, because when the things you're advocating for is going to benefit you personally in a way that negates what others think, that is not ethical. You know, if you're being influenced, if you're intentionally coming out, you know, to pursue policies in a particular context that will jeopardize the social good, jeopardize the majority of the people, that is not ethical. Those are some things that you need to consider by yourself before you undertake this. I know we'll take time for questions, and I'm happy to answer them, but let's go next slide. Now, so I want to talk about some of the principles, key principles here. Number one is transparency. If you're going to be advocating for public policy change, or you want to advocate for decisions to be made in favor of a particular thing because the status quo is not good, you have to be transparent. you cannot be secretive. What do I mean by that? Once you come out to the public and you put yourself in front of policymakers and the public, then you open yourself to scrutiny. So, and because you open yourself to scrutiny, because you have created room for questions to be asked, it is better to even proactively disclose everything. For instance, who is funding you? That's number one. Who is funding you? And the reason why this is important is that for policymakers, especially in the context of a geopolitical interest, they want to see, they're wondering if this idea or agenda you are pushing is not really coming up from some geopolitical interests, right? So you have to be open and say, well, we have been funded to do this, right? Or this is an issue that is representing a constituency. You have to define your constituency. You have to show who you are representing. You have to show whose voice you are amplifying. If you do not do that, right, it becomes questionable. People begin to ask questions about who exactly do you represent here, right? All the affiliations you've made, all the people you're partnering with, they have to be openly, they have to be clear. People don't need to even ask these questions. They have to be clear even from the first communication that you make. Accountability is another one. The question here is that if you make a statement because you are a policy advocate or on behalf of a group, and then you say certain things or you issue a public statement, right? Be ready to take that responsibility if, for instance, there is a backlash. I give you an example of myself. Once, I had said something to a senator once, or rather a member of the House of Rep in Abuja, and I was saying that, does he know that mosquitoes kill more people than Boko Haram, right? He was greatly offended. He was greatly offended because he thought, how on earth would you compare mosquitoes killing more people than Boko Haram? But that's what the facts say. And so I was sure of my facts. So I went back to bring the numbers to say malaria is caused by mosquitoes, right? But malaria was killing a lot more people than the issue of security threats. But I was not trying to downplay. The backlash for me was that they misunderstood what I was saying and was thinking that I was saying that terrorism was less important than fighting malaria, right? But instead, I was actually saying, look, the attention you're paying to terrorism, right, pay similar, if not even more attention on fighting malaria, you know? And that was seen, so because of that misunderstanding, it was a major backlash. In fact, he was very angry. He asked me to leave his office, right? Because he thought I was underplaying the issue of the security threats, but that wasn't what I was doing. But I took responsibility that I have not communicated properly, because if I did, then that understanding that he got is not what he would have gotten. So I needed to refine my strategy to say, how do you put it in a way that will get the people, the target policymakers, the people you're targeting, to understand what you want them to understand. And so those are the kind of things you do. You take account, you are accountable, right? And then when you spend money and people ask questions, you should be able to provide those the examples, right? So the other part is about fairness and equity. The quiz, of course, is that when you are advocating, the issue you're advocating for, if it jeopardizes public good, I've said that before, if it negates the general societal well-being, only because a particular segment of society is going to get the advantage. I give you an example, and I'm not going to be worried to say this, of course. It's on, tobacco advocacy. There are people who are advocating for, the free use of tobacco and for the restrictions to be lifted. And when you know that a lot of people are dying from smoking tobacco and from engaging in tobacco abuse, right? But if you see people go out to advocate for this, you will see that it is really more for the profit rather than for the public good. But you could be an advocate to say you're advocating for free enterprise. I don't know if that makes sense. So these are some examples where you need to think about what are the benefits from your advocacy, from what you're advocating for. How does that benefit? How does that what is the distribution of that benefit? Is it for a particular small set of people, or is it for the general public? And how does the things you're advocating for not negate the general good of the public? Those are some questions. Then respect for diversity, of course, it should be all inclusive. The values as you are dealing with advocacy, you should bring diverse voices. In fact, in the next slide we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the issue about how much of thinking have you done about the issue to the point where it reflects what do you call it? It reflects the voices and the rights and the dignity of all concerned. It's not just not just the restricted small view that you may know. So you have to open up. Ethical advocacy means open up the space and getting diverse thoughts and opinions. And that's when you're able to you can connect to a wider audience, and then you can build partnership, and then you can mobilize more people to join that advocacy. Those are some thoughts. Next slide, please. Now, the question is how do we navigate the challenges here? It is not, we've talked about the things, the principles, but in dealing with all of these principles, how do you go about it? How do you improve what you currently have? And how do you get the attention that does not make you a target of negative press? First one, we'll talk about transparency. I've said that before, and I'm not going to overemphasize that. If you're not transparent, I'm not talking about you waiting for questions to be asked about who is funding you, what you're doing, who you are collaborating with, where you are partnering, all of those questions. You don't need to wait for those to be asked. Proactively disclose them. Disclose them. If you have a website, let everything be plain and simple. Create fact sheets, right? So that people can see, when they see your name and they see what you're advocating for, they already know where this is coming from. Transparency should be proactive. It should not be retroactive. It's not be reactive. Not like wait until people see you before you can, people ask you before you can answer. Of course, I've talked about inclusive dialogue. You need to identify stakeholders. So you need to understand that you cannot do advocacy successfully if you are going with a narrow point of view. You have to open up the space, get diverse thought, do self-critique, get voices. Do not see people who are against your issue, for instance, as enemies. Bring them, understand their challenge, and then you can then improve what you're asking for. You can improve your advocacy because of the diverse voices that you get into the space. And that's why when you propose a policy solution, it will have been well thought out because diverse views have been considered, and then you build consensus. That is an art. The art of building consensus is really a tough one for advocates. Otherwise, you show up in meetings and you are talking about a particular issue, and another NGO in the same space is speaking against the issue that you're proposing. And you begin to ask yourself, why are we divided? We should be speaking together. Those kind of things shouldn't happen if you already bring in diverse voices. Then my next point is on evidence-based approach. And that's the question I wanted to ask. Many of us are undertaking advocacy from a point of view of passion, right? Rather than a point of view of evidence. I want to repeat that. Many of us undertake advocacy issues, the issues we clamor, right? From a point of view of passion. One question in the public space and you have no answer. You have no answer because you haven't done the research. And that is why for advocates, policy analysis, deep research is the foundation for which you build any credible advocacy approach. Because if you do not do that, when people are asking the question, then you bring the facts. You bring the facts out because it is evidence-based, right? It is, and the data you are presenting is credible data. It's not data from some sources that is questionable. This is the foundation, the basis for which how you can navigate those challenges of ethical policy advocacy. And then the final bit around this is about strategic communications. I can't overemphasize this. The people that you want to target, I'm talking of policymakers, you can never at any point make them feel that they are being manipulated. And I want to say this, I want to emphasize this because many times as advocates, we actually do a lot of manipulation. So we raise emotions. There's things we call it nowadays, we call it human interest stories. And I agree, it's a major way to do advocacy, but we need to do it in a point where it clearly identifies all the stakeholders concerned. It is not just for one aspect, and then you leave other aspects, right? So strategically, you have to avoid misinformation. Because when you do that, then it's no longer ethical. And then if you are found out, you will destroy the credibility of not just yourself, but every other advocate in the same space. That is why you have to be certain of where you're doing this. You communicate responsibly. You avoid manipulation, avoid misinformation. And in the era of social media, this is I can't overemphasize this, because you say one thing, people give half information, amplify it, and then people begin to take that as truth. But so we need to think about balancing. Otherwise, you will fall victim of unethical advocacy. Next slide, please. Okay, so I give some examples here. I mean, I know all of you are doing great work, so I didn't want to give specific name specific advocacy campaigns that I have been involved in, but I wanted to just think about some of these ones. People who are advocating for healthcare access, like the example I made at the beginning, right? Usually will bring in a broader group of stakeholders. When you're advocating for health and well-being, usually you don't go wrong there, because again, people are dying. Like we all know, if we're all just one sickness away from poverty. So the more you advocate around healthcare issues, the more you're likely to be. The issues are strong, but the question is, how much research or what level of analysis have you done before you can make specific solutions? So what am I saying here? You could advocate for healthcare access, but what solution are you advocating for? Is the solution well thought out, right? And that's the question you want to ask yourself, not just a solution that will benefit a certain people, right? Youth empowerment campaigns are the same thing. We've advocated for quite a lot of that. We're advocating for jobs to be created and all of those things, training and capacity building for young people, political engagement, political inclusion for young people. I'm not in Nigeria. We all know the popular campaign that Yaga did around. Sorry, it's leaving my head now. Okay, forget it. You remember?
Not too young to run.
Yeah, sorry.
Not too young to run.
Not too young to run. Thank you. Not too young to run. So those are examples of very amazing advocacy issues. And again, it was clear. It was clear. One, it brought in broad stakeholders. It was transparent where they were coming from. You could understand the issue to the point where it led to constitutional change. That is an amazing example that I'd like to throw out all the time, right? And again, right now, another part I'm talking about that is, another one I would talk about that is quite significant, which is really engaging and building momentum, is climate justice advocacy. Right now, we all know that no matter how beautiful our lives are, if the environment is not good for us, if the air is not clean, we will all die from pollution. If the one disaster happens from climate change related disasters, it could sweep out years and years of work, years and years of investments. We talk about, for instance, in the Lake Chad Basin, where the shrinking of the space, people are losing livelihood, poverty is entrenched. Talk about a drought in different places where cows and livestock are dying, especially in East Africa right now, and people are losing livelihoods. All of these are key issues that must change. And so we begin to, as we develop our advocacy ideas, my main concern under ethical policy advocacy is, what solutions are we providing? How thoughtful are those solutions? Who is bringing those solutions? Who are you partnering with? Who is funding those solutions? And those solutions are the things you're asking the government or the policymakers to take a decision about. And that is the first root of ethical considerations in advocacy. So if we're doing all of this with these examples, I mean, you can have different things you can think about, but I just put these three here for us to have ideas of some campaigns that you may already have seen within the country that shows, has a lot of ethical basis for that. Next slide, please. Okay. I wanted to look at these 7 criteria that I thought were good. So as you're looking at the issues, the solutions that you're proposing, the solutions that you're advocating for, there are certain things that I thought was important for us to consider. Evaluation, basically assess the merit of that solution. Assess it, really, really assess, and bring in voices. Bring in voices to assess with you, not just what you think. But it's important that everybody, or not, even if not everybody, majority of the people think the same way. We give solutions within context. We cannot give solutions that is outside of our context, and then or solutions that are offensive to our context. Indeed, we must change. I want to make this distinction. There are certain things we want to change. But if we come in as policy advocate without the facts, without an evaluation of the mapping, or we'll call it the stakeholders map, who are those that are for, who are those that are against, and why they think that way, our advocacy will already lose. I know I'm supposed to stay within the part of ethical public policy advocacy, but I'm already going into the art of advocacy. But I that could be another conversation. I'm sure you guys have had some of those conversations before. In the art of public policy advocacy, every stakeholder has to be assessed. You have to know, why are people, or why are policymakers, why have they not taken a decision about the solutions that you are proposing? Who are those that are against those solutions? And why are they against those solutions? It could be a cultural thing. So if it's a cultural process and then you bring a policy solution that negates the culture, be sure that you will be resisted significantly. In fact, your credibility will be called to question. They will dig into your books. They will send, the enforcement officers to you to even sometimes close up your place. Why? Because you will be offending the status quo. It is not wrong to offend the status quo, but you need to know why you are doing it. It is clear in your head why you're doing it. Priority. We always make sure that the people that we represent, the constituents, I call them clients here, because for every advocate, you must represent either an idea or a people. So be sure that those ideas that are grounded in fact, grounded in reality, that are sensitive to the culture and context within which you work, actually receive the priority of your resources. And it must agree with your local context above external interest. I'm using the word external interest here because I know this is you said funded project. So, but if there are issues that are funded by foreign governments on African soil, right? You have to be sure that it is not against the national interest and the local interest, because you will be scrutinized. Guaranteed, you'll be scrutinized. And you don't want to be seen and labeled as an agent of foreign intervention. And that is one thing that I know has been a major problem with advocacy on the African continent, not just Nigeria, but across the continent, exactly. So you don't want to be labeled, you are agent of imperialists, right? So you have to be sure that the context within which you're advocating for, the people for which you're advocating, their interests take priority over any external interest, and you demonstrate that. Sensitivity has to deal with about how do you balance, majority versus minority, right? Your social responsibility here as an advocate is that it is the good of this, or the solution that you're proposing is for the general good, is not for a local view, local groups. And then, of course, veracity is you must make sure that whatever you are saying is true. I've talked about strategic communication. I talked about avoiding misinformation and manipulation, right? But as we think about the facts that we uphold, or the facts that we present for the solutions that we are proposing for policy change, it has to be true. You cannot manipulate facts. You cannot manipulate facts in order to gain following. And that is very surprising for me these days, because I see online advocacy tools that are being used, and it's a lot of manipulation. They give half-truth. So there is something about being true and bringing half-truth or some information just so that you can gain following and gain support and gain sympathy or gain empathy. So we need to try to be balanced. We need to be trustworthy in all of our communications. The facts should speak for themselves, not just what we think. Of course, as we are talking about all the things we're talking about, our communication should be visible. We should be as visible as possible. We should be transparent, but as we are transparent, we need to be seen. Otherwise, you're not going to get credibility. I give an example. There was once we advocated for something in Nigeria for a budget allocation to health. And when we went out to the DG of budget office, and I was saying, oh, my name is this, I'm from here. He said, I know you. You guys have taken over the airwaves already, right? Visibility is key. People should know what you stand for and do that. And of course, respect. The respect here that I know is that I've talked about the laws and the regulations, but do not think that policymakers that you are going to be talking to are stupid. I really need to emphasize this one. Many times as advocates, we usually think that policymakers are actually against us. It is not true. And that's why I've always been a proponent of partnership. Even in a place where resources are scarce, you can find internal champions, right? Do not think that policymakers or people in government are stupid, that they don't know anything. You are the only one that went to school. You're the only one that can analyze. That is not correct. You have very brilliant people in government. So don't just throw facts around or do anything, or say things that will try to manipulate them, right? Or think that they cannot take decision for themselves. Respect their autonomy. Respect the fact that they know what they are doing too. So, but they have to weigh decisions. That is why you make your case, but not to make them look like they are stupid, right? And I've seen that a lot, especially around the African continent, where before you get into a meeting, you already assume that the person doesn't know anything. That is not correct. So we need to respect people, respect all the stakeholders, including the policymakers, otherwise we run into trouble. The last one, of course, is consent. Before you say you go out in the name of anybody, you must indeed ensure that they gave you the mandate. That is one of the things that I know politicians hate. When you come in as an advocate and then you say, oh, you are representing all the poor people from this state or from that country or from whatever, they will tell you that we were sent, we were elected by these people that you say you represent. So that is why you have to come back to your people. Those people you say you represent, you have to engage with grassroots, engage with those people that are really, living the experience of the issues that you're advocating for. It's not just what you think or sit down in your office in Abuja or in Lagos or in Jalingo, the state capital. You write the policy paper and the policy brief, and then you go out and start advocating. But the people who are living the reality are not involved, they're not participating. You need to go back somehow and find a way to communicate and get their consent. Let them see that they are part of a process. Because that is the only time you have the mandate to speak with authority on the issues that you're speaking about. I've taken a lot of time here. Next slide, please. I'm going to try to get through. I think the main message for me here today is that if you do not want to lose credibility, if you do not want to lose a sense of, if you do not want to put yourself in the space where you become an object of criticism, right? Or you want to, manipulate the space of advocacy, it is critical that you need to establish trust and credibility. The stakeholders themselves will call you if they need questions, if they have questions, if they're trying to understand the issue. You should be a reference point because of the facts of your advocacy, because of the credibility of your advocacy, because you are trustworthy. Everybody knows who and what you stand for. That is the pillar, that is the central core of ethical policy advocacy. And unless we do that, unless we come to the place where we can be above board at every given point, it becomes very difficult to really convince policymakers. I'd like to end there on this slide. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mr. Edwin. That was a marathon. Thank you. We appreciate your insights on the topic, and even for me, a number of things have been learned. You have talked so much about the things we should consider. If I got you correctly, you mentioned a few things about transparency. You talked about inclusive dialogue, and you talked about evidence-based, advocacy, as well as strategic communication as things that we must give consideration to. Other ethical considerations revolve around the 7 criteria that you have mentioned: issues of evaluation, sensitivity, visibility, priority, veracity, respect, and fundamentally the issue of consent, which is something that everybody who works in the advocacy space takes very seriously. I want to thank you again immensely, Mr. Edwin, for those wonderful insights. I know a number of us who are on the call will want to ask a few questions. There are those of you who are raising your hands, obviously, to ask questions. Mr. Edwin will be available to take your questions, but we would like you to please put your questions in the question and answer box so that we can pick those questions from there, and Mr. Edwin will respond to your questions. I know a number of you are talking about the presentations and all that. We will do well to share them with you, but please, if you have any questions, Olaide, your hand is up. Could you drop your question in the question and answer box? We'll pick it up from there. Thank you, please, for the commendations on what Mr. Edwin had done. The question and answer box is open. We don't have any questions there. Olaide, your hand is still up. Would you like to put the question in the question and answer box? Please, thank you. Mr. Edwin, it's wonderful to hear all you said, especially about the issue of passion versus evidence-based, advocacy, which is one of the things that the scale program is targeted at addressing, because we want to see that local organizations become stronger in themselves to be able to do advocacy for the sake of the need, rather than just existing as CSOs. Would you like to share a little more insights on what you meant by passion versus evidence-based approach?
Thank you. I think there were two dimensions to this. The first one is where is the issue coming from, right? So it is sometimes easy to spot a problem, right? And you spot a problem, and then you are angry about it, and because of that, you start what do you call it now? You start generating noise. I use the word noise, right? You're approaching policymakers, you're saying everything you want to say, and then you have not really checked the root cause of the problem, right? So you take a problem and you make a big deal out of it, you make noise about it, but you haven't even understand why the problem is there. It could be that the solutions are not exactly where the solution that you're proposing. And okay, let me put it this way. It comes mainly from the point of the solutions that you propose. So if you're passionate, you see an issue, you take on the issue, then you start creating solutions, right? But you haven't taken the time to analyze why that issue is there. What are the key drivers, right? And then, or there are other considerations to make. What is the fact? What are the facts? What are the what do you call it? What is the context within which this issue is existing? Why has it stayed this long? But if you don't ask those questions, you'll basically be driven by the passion because you want the solution, right? You want that issue to change. And so you propose solutions that you think are obvious to the eyes, but they are not practicable, right?
And,
I give
and
you a simple example.
need to be convinced with the facts.
Yeah, so it's not just a conviction right now. The solutions you propose, I give you an example. Health campaigns. We all do health campaigns, right? And we've been to see the DG budget for health, and then we've talked about, oh, we want this allocation is too small, right? And then the Minister of Finance then asked us, okay, what should I put down in order to break this one up, right? Because like I was saying, I mentioned to a member of House of Rep that Boko Haram was killing, mosquitoes were killing more people than Boko Haram, right? So in a way, what he was hearing was that I was saying, don't invest in terrorism and anti-terrorism, put the money in health, right? But does that sound logical? You know, because it for the government who has limited resources, you have to think about the solutions you're proposing. If the Minister of Finance asks you, okay, what should I drop so that I can increase the budget of health? What is your answer, right? And so those are the questions you should have asked before you come before a policymaker, right? And so you would already have known what exactly are the alternatives. Where would the money come from? Then you can say, let money come from here and this place. We're not saying you should drop anything, but we're saying that you can increase the budget from this point. Some of the things we usually do then is that we do an analysis called wasteful expenditure in the budget, right? And when we're saying that when the money in the budget is too low for health, that if you deprioritize some, bogus buying of cars and, huge amount allocated to some, things, that you can actually get money from there to put here. So, but if you're not ready with those kind of data, then it becomes a really difficult thing to do evidence-based advocacy. So that makes sense. So those are just an example of driven by passion and driven by the facts and the data.
Thank you so much, Mr. Edwin. So we have a sea of questions now coming in. Somebody had asked the question whether lobbying is ethical, So is lobbying ethical? Would you like to take that?
Lobbying, so we call lobby as the word. Lobby is one pillar of advocacy. So let me give you an example. advocacy in itself is another, I can replace the word advocacy for lobbying. What do I mean by that? The ultimate aim of lobbying or advocacy is to influence a decision in your favor, right? So you have lobby meetings. When you have one-on-one meetings with a policymaker to present the facts and give them the reason why they should go for a particular solution that you're proposing, that is lobbying, right? But I can understand the negative connotation that comes with lobbying in the sense that, and we don't use that word for lobbying, instead we call it advocacy, is that it comes with like political connotation, or even it comes like as if the private sector is driving an interest. And this is the reason why I'm saying the difference for lobbying and advocacy in the sense that what is the interest you're proposing? Is it a narrow interest? If you're lobbying or having meetings with policymakers for a narrow interest, maybe for profits or for a particular license to operate, that is different from what we're discussing about. Here we're discussing public policy advocacy and lobbying in that sense, which basically means one-on-one meetings or meetings with policymakers to influence them to take the solutions that you're proposing, has to be in the public interest. It has to be to change the status quo on a particular issue that is not right. That's the thing. So lobbying in that context is very ethical.
Thank you so much, Mr. Edwin. Someone had asked the question that in implementing an advocacy program, many times stakeholders want their identities to be kept. Is it ethical to get information from such stakeholders without disclosure? So if you have a stakeholder who do not want their identity exposed,
okay,
you need consent. I think that will border on the issue of consent that you talked about.
Yes. Okay. So when I talk about consent here, and I talk about who you represent. So when you come out, public policy advocacy is different. In that case, the issue that you're discussing or bringing, or you're trying to get the public policymakers to take a decision in favor of, are decisions, are issues that are public in nature, right? Now, you may not want to disclose who is funding you because they don't want to be identified, right? You may not want to disclose who is, I don't know how to put it, but for if you're advocating for a public policy, there's really nobody that should be outside scrutiny, right? Unless you're advocating for, say, I give an example, say rape victims, right? And because of the reasons why, and we know the reason why a rape victim would not want to be identified, okay? Now, those could be seen as, you can, but if you advocate for policy change to criminalize rape, for instance, you don't need to be identifying individuals in that sense, but you can identify a group, and it will be clear from anybody who is receiving you as an advocate to know who you are really representing. The issue should be public in the sense that you don't need to name individuals, but the constituency should be clear. And the people that you're advocating for need to be involved in the sense that they give you the solutions that you're proposing actually resonates with them. I don't know if that makes sense. You cannot propose solutions that do not resonate with people who are victims of an issue, of an abuse that you're trying to advocate for. So those are the kind of connections you need to make. It does not necessarily mean identifying individually, but their voice is important. If that clears, I don't know.
Thank you, Edwin. Fatima is concerned about conflict of interest.
Yes.
And she's wondering, especially because you talked about people driven by passion, many times against the issue of evidence. So she's asking, if you have personal experiences, can you base your advocacy on personal experiences? Would there be any form of conflict of interest?
No, not at all. So personal experience, it is very likely that if you experienced it, there are millions more who have also experienced exactly the same issue because you live in the same context. So, but if you go out to advocate for a hospital to be sited in your community, right? Because people in your community are losing access to, they don't have access to a public health facility and all of that. That is not conflict of interest, especially maybe say, for instance, I for one, I lost my first child in a hospital because of bad hospital service. So when I was doing a health campaign, I was personally affected. And as such, the passion will come from there, but it is not enough, right? I have to find the evidence. I have to show why the regulation allows that kind of practice that would allow me to lose my child, right? Allows malpractice. So we have to find and look for those evidence. But when you now make it a particular issue, say you go and meet your lawmaker, and then you're asking them to say that the constituency project should be put in your father's compound, or
That
should be
becomes
put
very personal.
in your community. That has become personal. That is where there is real conflict of interest, right? Because it's no longer about the community and their access to healthcare. It's really more about what you stand to gain personally, right? Or if you're being funded by your I don't know where you get the money from, to advocate for a particular public facility to be put in your own domain so that you can have control over it. That is conflict of interest. I don't know if that makes sense. So those are some areas where conflict of interest happens, but and then vis-a-vis who is driven by passion.
All right, thank you so much. Francis is concerned and he wants to know whether ethics are universal or that ethics could be, domestic, so to speak. So could you have the same set of ethics in the West and have another set of ethics in some other location?
Yeah, ethical principles are the same, are universal, in the sense that if you see the things I highlighted, please let us not get this wrong. Please, let's stay within this. Ethical principles are universal. Transparency is universal. It doesn't matter whether you're in the West or wherever, right? You cannot manipulate people. You have to be truthful. Truth is universal, isn't it? Being accountable is universal, right? Those are the principles that are universal. But when you now come to the issue of context, I say context specific, there are things that we universally hold as say Africans that may not take the pride of place. Say, I give an example, religious, place of religion in advocacy, right? In some contexts, religion the influence is very minimal, right? But in some other contexts, if you do advocacy without the religious context within which you are working, you're already going to lose before you even start, right? So the issues themselves can be contextual, but ethical principles are universal. The principle of transparency, the principle of credibility, the principle of being accountable, of speaking the truth, of no manipulation, of communicating, all of those are universal. Anywhere in the world, it is the same.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Edwin. So Benedict's question borders on sensitive issues. So when you're advocating around things that are very sensitive, especially like security, and under the kind of circumstances we have in Nigeria, getting data in respect of such sensitive issues may be difficult. How do you balance ethical considerations or sensitivity, as the case may be, especially with respect to security?
So I would say this: when you're advocating, say, I'm just giving an example. You're advocating for increased security expenditure. Let's use that word, right? And then you are demanding, maybe through Freedom of Information Act, FOI, you're requesting to see the expenditure of the military in a particular area, right? You're going to be facing a very uphill task, right? Because the information you're looking for is actually very sensitive, but you may need it to do that. But what you don't want to do, and this is where ethical issues here, you don't want to hack the military to get that information, right? So you want to go through the legal route where you are demanding, you can insist, you can even go to court to demand that. That is ethical because you're working within your legal boundaries. But if you now say because they will not give it to you, then you bring in hackers to now go in and manipulate the system to get the information. That is unethical. I don't know if that makes sense. So it is sensitive, right? But you still work within boundaries to get and demand what you need to get. So those are some examples we need to go. We cannot break the law because we are trying to do public policy advocacy. Instead, we should use the legal means available to us to get the information we need. In the same way, there are other sensitive issues, and we just talked about one, rape, and even say child marriage and the fallout of those issues of health from the issue of child marriage. You will face an uphill task to bring certain things to light, but that does not mean you should begin to expose people, because doing that itself just jeopardizes everything. You cannot expose them and make them become have security threats on their lives because of the things you want to use to do advocacy. So you have to work within the bounds of one, not just the law, but also about the sensitivity and the safety of people that you're advocating for. I don't know if that covers it. We can talk about this much more that time. I know the time is going.
Thank you so much, Mr. Edwin. The questions keep coming, so much insights. But while you are talking about a few, I see that your response cuts across so many other questions that have been asked. I would like to take this particular question. If my name is Hassan from Sokoto, his question is, giving the example of the SARS protest as an advocacy, I wonder how public protest becomes an advocacy. Can I then further ask which steps is best methodology to conduct advocacy for change? So it's
Okay.
as a form of methodology, or
Okay, I see another question too. Somebody was talking about campaigning, for instance, especially where and then also look at where you're constantly resisted. Somebody asked that question here that I saw, where you're constantly resisted, and then where the role of public protest. So advocacy is a spectrum, right? It's not one thing. Let me use that word. So advocacy starts from having a one-on-one meeting, say with your local government chairman or your councillor, right? Let's even come to your own, even in your family, advocacy starts with when you speak with your dad or your mom or whatever, and you want them to do something to change the status quo in your favor, or to consider the solutions that you're proposing as a better solution than the status quo. That is advocacy. So one-on-one meeting, what would somebody call lobbying just now, is an advocacy, is part of the advocacy spectrum, right? Online advocacy happens, right? You can put your information out there, gain awareness. Awareness will then build pressure, and then pressure also is to influence the final decision. That is advocacy. Protests is one of the last bits. I talked about going to the court as another point just now, right? So there are different levels of advocacy, because the ultimate aim is that you want to change the decision in the favor of what you are proposing. That's the aim. So if you bring people to a protest, to protest a particular idea, right? Protesting for the sake of protesting is not advocacy, but protesting for the sake of a solution that you are proposing. I give you a typical one, End SARS campaign, right? It's like, look, we do not want to be harassed. Young people don't want to be harassed by the government, by the police. This arm of the police is harassing young people. This cannot go on, right? It needs to stop. That is an instrument of the state that people protested about. But you can imagine that before it resulted in protest, there have been several years and months of public complaining and lobbying to make sure that this doesn't continue. But when it did not show up, it landed in the place where people organized and made a protest. So I would say it's a spectrum. It depends on what part of the spectrum are you in. If you're doing campaigning, which is basically raising awareness, the aim is to make the issue a priority issue among decision makers. And as you're doing that, you're trying to build public pressure so that those who say they represent you as constituents, wherever you come from, right, can then take this issue as a national issue. And that is the time when they can begin to discuss it, and then for the solutions that you're proposing to take to get noticed. So I would say it depends on where you are in the stage of advocacy. The first, of course, usually will be, hey, one-on-one. Go meet the policymaker directly and say, these are the facts, these need to change. These are the people we represent. These are the basis for which we're asking for this. And if they do it, sign it immediately. Or if it's a law you want them to pass, you don't need to protest in that sense. But you could go on to other stages based on the response you get, based on the strategy you are using, based on how many people are involved. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just wanted to, I'm trying to shorten it, but we can talk about this forever.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we'll take the last question that asks whether the use of human stories, and I guess this is about lived experiences.
Yeah.
The use of human stories, could we consider it to be unethical in doing
No,
advocacy?
it's not unethical. It depends on your aim. If you use human stories to manipulate policymakers, that is unethical. Don't know if that makes sense. Okay, let me give you. Have you seen where people really stage photo? They go in and arrange a woman with a child that is suffering from something, right? They arrange it, even do makeup for them, right? And then you take picture, you do video. I've seen some documentaries that are just appalling, to be honest with you, right? And the aim is to really manipulate. And that, for me, is the part where you draw the line between what is ethical advocacy versus manipulation, right? So you do not want to do that. If you do this kind of call it staged human experience, and then you put it on CNN, right? And the government is embarrassed, okay? And the government just, instead of thinking about a solution, they get angry with you because they feel that you've embarrassed them. For some of them, as they are seeing it for the first time on CNN, those who are supposed to take decision about it, right? That is not the right way to do advocacy. So people are going through stuff, and then you capture them in their situation. You get their consent, and in fact, they're telling you, we want the government to come and help us. So, and you know, they're demanding this. That is a different way of using human stories, but not stories that you create, or you tell half truth, or you emphasize a particular part, not give the whole picture, just so that you can put your message across or make it look like this is the most important thing on earth. And then you do not even take that to those who have power to change the situation. You take that first, the first place you go is put it on social media and put it on everywhere. And the policymaker that you are trying to influence is not influenced. Instead, is angry with you, right? So those are the kind of things that as advocates, we think about our strategy and our approaches, because ultimately, it's not just about raising awareness. It's actually about influencing policy and influencing decisions. And if your method will not influence decisions, then there is no need to emphasize that. So I just want to leave it there. No, there's a whole lot to unpack, but I think that can do for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Edwin. If you guys can hear me, I was having some challenge with my network. Thank you so much. But there's a final question I would like you to just address very briefly. Someone talked about advocating for issues that probably do not have any legal backgrounds in Nigeria. So, for instance, there are laws prohibiting LGBTQ in Nigeria. Can you proceed to do some kind of advocacy around that when there is a law outrightly against it?
If I say I wasn't expecting this question, it's a lie. So, first of all, let me say this. Yes, the place to start is where the problem is. If we think that law is, goes against human rights, so the first place to start is not to start protesting against the issue that the law prohibits. It's actually to start by protesting or advocating for the law to be changed. I don't know if that makes sense. Because if you start acting or calling for issue that the law prohibits, you already become foul for you're acting against the law, isn't it? But if you start by demanding a change in the status quo, that's the point in all of this. What status quo are you trying to change? So if you're trying, you've seen, I'll give you an example. You've seen that in your community, people are being lynched because of they identifying as LGBTQ, right? You have a right to determine why that should not be. And if it is because there is a law that enables that, for instance, so your starting point of advocacy is to demand that the law be changed, right? And then you start doing the research, the analysis, and come up with all the facts and the evidence to show why this has to change. That is the first point. The other point I would say is this. If you get into a situation where people are not just disobeying the law does not even exist. I give an example of Child Rights Act, child marriage, and violence against women and children. Before the CEDAW conference, all of these things that were seen to be normal in terms of how people treat women and all of that, those gender-based violence, it became an issue for many years until the law was passed. So people advocate to pass a law that criminalizes some of the things that we thought was normal, right? So in the same way, so what I'm saying in essence is that it depends on where you are on the issue. If there is a law against it, your first place is to start to advocate for a change of that law, right? And then if there is no law that permits or that there's no law to prohibit certain violent acts, for instance, as an example, then you want to advocate for that law to be enacted. Those are the kind of places, some considerations you need to make. Where are you in the advocacy? What point should you be bringing as solutions? And that's what makes a difference.
Thank you so much, Mr. Edwin. This has been very insightful. Like you said, we can go on and on and on. We know that this is about the middle of the day. We have called out a lot of people from their different engagements. But for all of us, I think that it's been very useful. The comments we have received so far show that the interaction has been very valuable. For all of you who are on the call, you know that we will continue to speak about these things, and we will do our best to continue to engage the public with different issues that we can learn about so that we can strengthen capacity together. I want to thank you once again for being on the call, Mr. Edwin, and for facilitating the session. All right, thank you. Thank you so much. I would then like to call on Mr. Kunle to please give us a few words before we call it a day today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henry, for that opportunity to be part of today's meeting. And also, I would like to appreciate everyone, starting from our facilitator, for a wonderful presentation. Mr. Edwin, on behalf of the management of ACRE Associates, in collaboration with the SCALE project through the Palladium, I think, yeah, today's meeting and webinar is one of the webinars on this series that we learn a lot, especially about the ethicals of advocacy or advocacy ethicals. And I'm here today to say a big thank you for that support, for your wealth of experience that you have shared with all country, even I think beyond Nigeria. So let me say that on behalf of the management of ACRE, we appreciate everyone for participating in this webinar at this moment. Thank you once again, and goodbye.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kunle. Mr. Edwin, do you have any final before?
No, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all. Henry, can we log off now? Yes? Okay. Bye, everybody. Yeah.